Welcome, dear listener, to another journey through the gentle corridors of time. Tonight, we travel back nearly 6,000 years to a place where humanity first learned to write, to build cities that touched the sky, and to organize itself into something recognizable as civilization. Settle yourself comfortably now, and let your breathing slow to match the ancient rhythms we're about to explore. Imagine yourself drifting backward through the centuries, past the familiar landmarks of history, beyond the pyramids of Egypt, beyond the earliest kingdoms you might know, to a land between two rivers where everything began. This is Mesopotamia, a word that simply means between rivers, the fertile crescent of land, nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates in what we now call Iraq. Here, around 3500 BCE, the Sumerians created humanity's first true civilization. They gave us writing, the wheel, the first cities, the first laws. They built ziggurats that scraped the heavens and irrigation systems that turned desert into garden. They lived, worked, loved, and died in ways both utterly foreign and surprisingly familiar to our modern eyes. Tonight, we'll walk through their world in 4 gentle stages. First, immersing ourselves in the daily rhythms of an ordinary Sumerian city dweller. Then following the remarkable life of Sargon of Akkad, who built the world's first empire. Exploring the mysterious practices of their religion and the archaeological wonders they left behind. And finally, contrasting the lives of common people with those of the elite who ruled over them. So close your eyes, if you wish, and let us begin this journey to the very dawn of human civilization, where the first cities rose from the marshlands, and where humanity first learned to leave its mark upon eternity. The darkness before dawn in the great city of yore was never truly silent. Even in these quiet hours, you would hear the gentle lapping of canal water against the mud brick walls, the soft shuffle of reed boats carrying early fishermen to their nets, and the distant lowing of cattle from the temple herds. The air carried the perpetual scent of the river, that mixture of fertile silt, marsh plants, and the faint sweetness of date palms that lined the waterways. Imagine yourself awakening in a modest home in Ur's residential quarter. Around 2500 BCE, your dwelling is built of sun-dried mud bricks, its thick walls keeping the interior cool, even in the blazing heat of summer. The house is arranged around a central courtyard, open to the sky, where a few date palms provide shade, and the family well provides water, drawn up with a simple rope and bucket. Your sleeping chamber is small and practical, with a raised platform of brick serving as your bed, covered with woven reed mats and perhaps a woolen blanket. The room's single small window is positioned high on the wall, designed more for ventilation than light. In the corner sits a large pottery jar for storing grain, and hanging from wooden pegs are your few personal possessions: an extra tunic, a pair of sandals, and perhaps a small bronze knife. As the first pale light filters through that high window, you rise without ceremony. There is no glass in the window, merely a wooden shutter that can be closed during sandstorms or the rare winter rains. The morning air is cool and sweet, carrying hints of the activities already beginning throughout the city. Morning routines and sustenance. Your first task is to kindle the cooking fire in the courtyard. This is no simple matter of striking a match fire as precious, and most households maintain a small ember through the night, feeding it carefully with dried reeds and date palm fronds. You blow gently on the glowing coals, adding thin strips of bark until flames dance upward, casting flickering shadows on the courtyard walls. Breakfast is a simple affair. Flat barley bread, perhaps spread with a bit of date honey or sesame oil, and a cup of beer. Yes, beer-even children drink a weak version of this barley-based beverage, as it's often safer than water and provides necessary nutrients. The beer is thick, cloudy, and mildly alcoholic, strained through reeds to remove the larger pieces of grain. It tastes earthy and substantial, nothing like the clear, fizzy drinks of later eras. The bread itself is a marvel of early agricultural innovation. The barley was grown in carefully irrigated fields outside the city, harvested by teams of workers and ground in communal mills operated by the temple administration. The grain is coarse and nutritious, though it wears down teeth over the years, a constant reminder of life's grinding necessities. As you eat, the sounds of the city awakening grow stronger. Donkeys bray as merchants prepare their caravans. Children's voices echo from neighboring courtyards as families begin their daily routines. The rhythmic thudding of mortar and pestles resonates as households prepare food for the day ahead. The workshop quarter. Your work takes you to the artisan quarter of the city, where specialized craftsmen produce the goods that make you prosperous and renowned throughout the known world. The streets here are narrow, barely wide enough for a loaded donkey to pass, and they wind seemingly at random between workshops and storage buildings. The ground beneath your sandaled feet is hard-packed earth, worn smooth by countless generations of footsteps. Walking through these streets is a sensory experience that immerses you completely in the world of ancient craftsmanship. The air is thick with the scents of various trades, the acrid smell of metalworking, where copper and tin are melted and combined to create bronze. The rich, organic aroma of leather being treated with animal fats and plant oils. The dusty fragrance of pottery workshops where clay vessels dry in the sun. You pass the metal workers first, their forges glowing, even in the morning light. These craftsmen work with bronze, copper, silver, and occasionally gold, creating everything from farming tools to jewelry. The temperature near their workshops is always several degrees warmer than the surrounding streets, and the rhythmic hammering of metal on anvil provides a constant percussion that echoes off the narrow walls. The sound is hypnotic, the steady ring of bronze being shaped into spear points, axe heads, and the countless tools that make civilization possible. Sparks fly in brief, golden arcs, dying quickly in the earthen street. The metal workers themselves are lean and strong, their arms and faces marked by small scars from flying sparks and hot metal, their hands permanently stained with the residue of their craft. The textile workshops. Further along, you encounter the textile quarter, where the city's famous woolens and linens are produced. Here, the atmosphere is quieter, filled with the gentle sounds of spinning wheels and looms. Women and men work side by side, their fingers moving with practiced precision as they transform raw materials into the fabrics that clothe the city and provide valuable trade goods. The wool comes from the large flocks maintained by the temples in the countryside surrounding Ur. It arrives in the city raw and often still carrying the scent of the pastures, that mixture of grass, animal warmth, and open sky. The first step in processing involves washing the wool in large ceramic basins filled with water drawn from the canals. The soapy water, made from plant ashes and animal fats, creates a rich lather that removes the natural oils and dirt. Watching the workers at their looms is almost meditative. The steady rhythm of the shuttle passing back and forth through the vertical threads creates a gentle, repetitive sound. The weaver's movements are economical and graceful, developed through years of practice. They chat quietly as they work, sharing news and gossip, their voices blending with the mechanical sounds of their craft. The finished textiles are remarkable in their variety and quality. Simple undyed wool creates sturdy everyday clothing, while more elaborate pieces might be dyed with precious colors, deep blue from lapis lazuli, rich red from cochineal insects, and brilliant yellow from saffron. The most luxurious fabrics incorporate threads of silver or even gold, creating garments fit for priests and royalty. Your path takes you past one of the city's scribal schools, where young boys and occasionally girls learn the complex art of cuneiform writing. This is perhaps the most revolutionary innovation of Sumerian civilization, the ability to record thoughts, laws, stories, and accounts in permanent form. The students sit cross-legged in the courtyard, each with a portion of wet clay spread on a small wooden board. They hold reed styluses, thin pieces of reed cut to specific angles and sharpened. to precise points. The cuneiform system requires pressing these styluses into the clay at various angles and depths to create the wedge-shaped marks that give the script its name. The process is painstaking and requires years to master. A single word might require dozens of individual marks, each positioned exactly right. The students practice by copying traditional texts, hymns to the gods, mathematical exercises, and portions of the great epic poems that preserve the culture's stories and values. Teacher moves among them, his voice calm and measured as he corrects their work. The clay tablets are temporary after the lessons. They'll be smoothed flat and reused. Only the most important documents will be fired in kilns to preserve them permanently. The sound in the courtyard is the gentle scratching of reeds against clay, punctuated by the teacher's quiet corrections and encouragement. Learning to read and write opens doors to positions of power and respect in Sumerian society. Scribes keep temple records, manage trade accounts, record legal proceedings, and preserve the literature that connects the present to the mythical past. They are the guardians of civilization itself, the keepers of humanity's first written memories. Canal system as midday approaches. You make your way toward the main canal that brings life to the city. The Sumerian irrigation system is a wonder of engineering, a network of channels, locks, and reservoirs that transforms the desert into fertile agricultural land and brings fresh water directly into the heart of urban areas. The main canal is perhaps 30 feet wide and runs straight through the city like a liquid highway. The water moves slowly but steadily, carrying small boats loaded with goods and people. The canal's banks are built up with stone and brick, preventing erosion and creating walkways for pedestrians and pack animals. Standing on the bank, you can observe the constant traffic that keeps the city alive. Reed boats pole past, their curved prows cutting silently through the brown water. These boats are marvels of adaptation built from the marsh reeds that grow abundantly in the region. They're lightweight, waterproof, and perfectly suited to the shallow canals. The boat builders bind the reeds into tight bundles, then lash these bundles together to create vessels that can carry remarkable loads while drawing very little water. Larger cargo boats, constructed from wooden planks and sealed with bitumen, carry the heavier goods. Grain from the countryside, stone quarried from distant hills, and luxury items traded from far-off lands. The boatmen call to each other as they navigate, their voices echoing off the water and the buildings that line the canal. The water itself is precious beyond measure. In this land where rain is rare and uncertain, the irrigation system means the difference between abundance and famine. Temple officials carefully regulate the flow, opening and closing gates to distribute water fairly among the various districts and agricultural areas. The heat of midday, as the sun reaches its peak, the city settles into the slower pace that characterizes midday in hot climates. The streets empty gradually as people retreat to the shaded courtyards of their homes or the cool interiors of workshops and storage buildings. Even the ever-present sounds of commerce and craft production fade to a gentler murmur. This is the time for the main meal of the day, a more substantial affair than the morning's simple bread and beer. Families gather in their courtyards, where the cooking fires have been carefully maintained since dawn. A meal might include fish from the canals, mutton from the temple flocks, or fowl from the marshes. These proteins are often prepared in stews, slow-cooked in large ceramic pots with onions, garlic, and whatever vegetables are available. Barley appears again, but now in different forms: thick porridge, coarse bread, or fermented into a stronger beer for special occasions. Dates provide sweetness, while herbs and spices many imported from distant lands add flavor and mask the taste of food that might be less than perfectly fresh. The cooking methods are simple but effective. Meat might be roasted on spits over open fires, boiled in ceramic pots, or dried and preserved for later consumption. Bread is baked in clay ovens heated by burning reeds and brush. The skill lies not in complex techniques, but in the careful management of fire, timing, and the precious resources of food and fuel. As families eat, conversation flows around the eternal concerns of human life: work and weather, health and relationships, plans for the future, and memories of the past. Children play quietly in the corners of courtyards, their games often mimicking the adult activities they observe daily. The sounds are domestic and peaceful: the soft murmur of voices, the gentle clatter of pottery vessels, the rustle of palm fronds in the slight breeze. Afternoon labor. As the heat begins to subside in the later afternoon, the city gradually comes back to life. This is when much of the heavier work is accomplished: the construction projects that constantly expand and maintain the urban infrastructure, the transport of goods to and from storage facilities, and the more strenuous aspects of craft production. Construction of mud brick buildings is a community effort that requires careful coordination of many workers. First, the clay must be prepared mixed with chopped straw and water, kneaded until it reaches the proper consistency. This work is done in large pits near the construction site, where teams of workers trample the mixture with their feet, their movements creating a rhythmic dance of labor. The bricks themselves are formed in wooden molds, each one identical in size to ensure stable construction. The wet clay is pressed firmly into the molds, leveled with wooden tools, then turned out onto flat areas where they dry in the sun. Depending on the weather, this drying process takes several days, during which the bricks are turned regularly to ensure even exposure to air and sunlight. The laying of the bricks requires considerable skill. Master builders carefully plan the placement of each course, ensuring that walls are straight, corners are square, and the structure will bear the loads placed upon it. The mortar is simply more of the same clay mixture used for the bricks, but applied wet so that it bonds the dried blocks into solid walls. Watching a team of builders at work is like observing a choreographed performance. Each worker knows exactly when to lift, place, and adjust the heavy blocks. The rhythm of their work is punctuated by brief consultations with the master builder, whose experienced eye catches potential problems before they become serious. Sound is a constant, gentle scraping and thumping as brick meets brick and walls gradually rise toward the sky. Evening, rituals and community life as the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon. The character of the city changes once again. This is the time for social interaction, community rituals, and the gentler pleasures that make life bearable after a day of hard work. People emerge from their homes and workshops, gathering in small groups in the wider streets and the open spaces. Near important buildings, children who have been kept close during the heat of the day are allowed to play more freely, their laughter and shouts adding a joyful note to the evening soundscape. The evening meal is often a communal affair, especially for families living in the same compound or neighbors who have developed close relationships. Sharing food is both an economic necessity and a social pleasure-pooling resources, allows for greater variety and quantity, while the act of eating together strengthens the bonds that hold the community together. Musicians sometimes appear in the larger gathering spaces, playing instruments that would sound exotic to modern ears. Lyres with strings made from animal gut, drums covered with treated skins, and simple reed flutes that produce haunting, melodic tunes. The music is not for entertainment alone, but serves important social functions, preserving cultural traditions, marking religious observances, and providing a shared experience that unites the community. The evening air carries new scents as cooking. Fires are rekindled, and evening meals are prepared. The smoke drifts gently upward, dissipating in the cooling air. Palm fronds rustle more noticeably now as evening breezes begin to stir. The heat retained in the mud brick buildings gradually radiates away, making the outdoor spaces more comfortable and inviting. The approach of night, as darkness approaches, The activities of the city wind down in a gradual, natural rhythm. There are no electric lights to extend the day artificially, no mechanical clocks to segment time into rigid intervals. Life follows the ancient patterns established by sun and season. By the needs of work and the requirements of rest, oil lamps begin to appear in windows and doorways. Small ceramic vessels filled with olive oil or animal fat, with wicks made from plant fibers. The light they provide is warm and gentle, sufficient for the simple evening activities, but not enough to significantly extend productive work. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on walls and create intimate circles of illumination that draw people together. The life of Sargon of Akkad, builder of the world's first empire, a legend born from the reeds, as we drift from the quiet streets of ancient. You're into the deeper currents of Mesopotamian history. Our path leads us to a figure whose life reads like myth, yet shaped the real world in ways that echo through millennia. Sargon of Akkad, who lived around 2334 to 2279 BCE, became the architect of humanity's first true empire, uniting the quarreling city-states of Mesopotamia under a single crown and establishing patterns of rule that would influence civilizations for thousands of years to come. The story of Sargon's birth has been told and retold so many times that history and legend have become inextricably woven together, like threads in one of those fine Sumerian textiles we encountered in our journey through Ur. According to the tales preserved on cuneiform tablets, Sargon's mother was a priestess who could not acknowledge her child, perhaps because temple rules forbade such relationships, or perhaps because the father was someone whose identity had to remain secret. Imagine the scene along the banks of the Euphrates River on a quiet morning over 4,000 years ago. A young woman, her face marked by anxiety and sorrow, approaches the water carrying a small basket woven from reeds and sealed with bitumen, that same waterproofing material used by the boat builders we observed in Ur. Inside the basket lies an infant, barely days old, wrapped in soft wool cloth. The mother's movements are careful and deliberate as she places the basket among the reeds at the water's edge, where the current will carry it downstream, but the shallows might offer some protection. This scene echoes other stories you might recognize: the infant Moses hidden in the bulrushes, the baby Perseus cast adrift by his grandfather's fear. These are not mere coincidences, but reflections of a deep human pattern, the archetypal story of the hero, whose humble or hidden origins paradoxically mark him for greatness, the gardener's apprentice. Basket-carrying the infant Sargon did not drift far before it was discovered by Aki, a royal gardener who tended the pleasure gardens of Kish, one of the great city-states of early Mesopotamia. Aki was a man of humble station, but considerable skill, responsible for maintaining the elaborate gardens that surrounded the royal palace. Those carefully cultivated oases of green that provided both beauty and practical resources in the harsh Mesopotamian climate. Picture young Sargon growing up among the date palms and fruit trees, the herb gardens and ornamental pools that made up these royal grounds. His childhood would have been spent learning the patient arts of cultivation, when to plant and when to harvest, how to channel water through irrigation, ditches no larger than a man's arm, which plants could thrive in the salty soil and which required the richest earth brought from distant fields. The work was demanding, but not without its pleasures. Garden work follows the gentle rhythms of growth and season, teaching patience and observation. Young Sargon would have learned to read the subtle signs of plant health, to understand the needs of growing things, and to work in harmony with natural cycles rather than against them. These lessons in timing, in patience, in the careful nurturing of potential would serve him well in his later career as a ruler. The gardens themselves were places of extraordinary beauty, designed not merely for practical cultivation, but as expressions of royal power and divine favor. Imagine walking through these spaces in the early morning, when the air was still cool and sweet with the scent of jasmine and rose. Water ran in carefully constructed channels, creating the sound of gentle streams in a land where natural water was precious. Birds nested in the trees, their songs adding music to the rustling of leaves and the splash of fountains dot as Sargon grew from child to youth. His intelligence and natural leadership qualities would have become apparent to those around him. Even, the ancient sources suggest that there was something remarkable about him. A charisma, a natural ability to command respect and loyalty that set him apart from other garden workers and servants. Perhaps Aki, his adoptive father, recognized these qualities and provided opportunities for the young man to develop them. Service in the court of Kish Sargons. Transition from gardener's apprentice to royal cupbearer represents one of those pivotal moments when individual talent meets historical opportunity. The position of cupbearer might sound humble to modern ears, but in the ancient world, it was a role of considerable trust and proximity to power. The cupbearer not only served the king's meals, but often served as an advisor, messenger, and confidant. Picture the young Sargon in the palace of Orzababa, king of Kish, moving through corridors lined with glazed bricks and decorated with the earliest examples of narrative art. The palace was a maze of courtyards, audience halls, private chambers, and storage rooms, all organized around the central throne room where the king held court and dispensed justice. As cupbearer, Sargon would have been present during royal audiences, military planning sessions, and diplomatic meetings. He would have observed firsthand how power operated in the early Mesopotamian world, the delicate balance between different city-states, the constant negotiations over water rights and trade routes, the religious ceremonies that legitimized royal authority, and the military preparations that were a constant necessity in a world of competing kingdoms. The cuneiform sources tell us that Sargon served his king faithfully, but they also hint at growing tensions. Perhaps the young man's obvious capabilities aroused jealousy or suspicion. Perhaps there were political factions within the court that saw him as either a useful ally or a dangerous rival. The ancient world was not a place where merit alone determined advancement. Birth, wealth, and political connections all played crucial roles. One of the most intriguing aspects of Sargon's story is how he managed the transition from servant to rival, from cupbearer to conqueror. The process was almost certainly gradual, involving the careful building of alliances, the accumulation of military experience, and the development of a vision that extended beyond the traditional boundaries of city-state politics. The vision of unity, what set Sargon apart from other ambitious men of his era, was not merely personal ambition, but a revolutionary concept. The idea that the competing city-states of Mesopotamia could be united under a single ruler, creating something larger and more powerful than any individual kingdom. This was not simply a matter of military conquest, though conquest would certainly be involved, but a fundamental reimagining of how political power could be organized and exercised. To understand the audacity of this vision, consider the world as it existed before Sargon's rise. Mesopotamia was divided into dozens of independent city-states, each centered on a major urban area and controlling the surrounding agricultural land. These cities, Ur, Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, Eridu, and many others had their own kings, their own patron deities, their own languages and dialects, their own legal traditions and commercial practices. The relationships between these city-states were complex and constantly shifting. Sometimes they formed alliances for mutual defense or profitable trade. More often, they engaged in conflicts over water rights, territorial boundaries, or commercial advantages. A king might claim suzerainty over neighboring cities, but such claims were usually temporary and dependent on military success that could be reversed by the next generation. Sargon envisioned something different, a unified realm where the benefits of cooperation would outweigh the advantages of independence, where standardized laws and practices would facilitate trade and communication, where a single military force could provide security more effectively than dozens of competing armies. It was a vision that would require not only military conquest, but also administrative innovation, diplomatic skill, and the ability to convince conquered peoples that they would be better off as part of a larger whole than as independent entities. Akkadian revolution around 2334 BCE, Sargon made his move against King Nirzababa of Kish, though the exact circumstances remain shrouded in the mists of ancient propaganda and legend. What we know for certain is that Sargon succeeded in overthrowing his former master and establishing himself as ruler, not just of Kish, but of a new kind of political entity altogether, rather than simply taking over the existing kingdom of Kish. Sargon established his capital at a new city called Akkada City, whose exact location remains one of archaeology's great mysteries, though it was certainly located somewhere in central Mesopotamia, probably along the Euphrates River. The choice to build a new capital rather than rule from an existing center was itself revolutionary, symbolizing a break with traditional patterns of legitimacy and power. Akkad became the heart of something unprecedented, a multi-ethnic, multilingual empire that stretched eventually from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. The Akkadian language, a Semitic tongue different from the Sumerian spoken in the southern cities, became the lingua franca of international diplomacy and trade. Akkadian administrative practices, legal concepts, and cultural innovations spread throughout the known world. A process of conquest was neither quick nor easy. Each city-state had its own military traditions, its own fortifications, its own reasons for resisting foreign rule. Sargon's campaigns required not only tactical brilliance, but also strategic patience, the ability to adapt his methods to different enemies and circumstances, and the wisdom to know when conquest should be followed by conciliation. Consider the siege of a typical Mesopotamian city during this period. The city would be surrounded by massive walls built of mud brick, often 30 or 40 feet high, and thick enough for chariots to drive along the top. These walls were defended by professional soldiers and citizen militia, armed with bronze weapons and backed by the desperate determination of people fighting for their homes and independence. Sargon's armies would have employed the siege techniques of the period, building ramps to scale the walls, undermining the foundations, and perhaps most importantly, cutting off the water supply that kept the city alive. The siege of a major city might last months, requiring enormous logistical preparation and the ability to keep an army supplied and motivated during long periods of tedious, dangerous work. The art of imperial administration military conquest, however, was only the beginning of Sargon's achievement. The real challenge lay in creating institutions that could hold such a diverse empire together, managing the competing interests of different peoples while maintaining the loyalty of conquered populations and the efficiency of imperial administration. Sargon's solution was a combination of flexibility and firmness that would become the template for successful imperial rule throughout history. Local traditions and customs were generally respected. Local elites were often incorporated into the imperial administration, and local deities were honored alongside Akkadian ones. At the same time, certain key areas military command, major trade routes, resource extraction remained firmly under central control. The Akkadian administrative system required a vast network of scribes, officials, messengers, and record keepers. Documents had to be maintained in multiple languages. Laws had to be adapted to local conditions while maintaining imperial consistency. And taxes had to be collected fairly and efficiently across hundreds of miles of territory. Imagine the complexity of managing trade routes that stretched from the lapis lazuli mines of Afghanistan to the cedar forests of Lebanon, from the copper deposits of Anatolia to the pearl beds of the Persian Gulf. Each region had its own products, its own seasonal patterns, its own traditional trading partners. Bringing all of this into a coherent economic system required not only administrative skill, but also a deep understanding of how different cultures and economies functioned. The flow of information throughout this empire was equally challenging. News of a rebellion in the west had to reach the capital quickly enough for a response to be organized and dispatched. Reports of harvest failures or natural disasters required immediate attention to prevent famine or social unrest. The coordination of military campaigns across such distances required planning and communication abilities that stretched the available technology to its limits. The burden of power as Sargon aged and his empire expanded, the personal costs of his achievement became increasingly apparent. The man who had once been a gardener's apprentice now bore responsibility for the lives and welfare of millions of people scattered across the known world. Every decision carried enormous consequences. Every policy affected countless communities. Every military campaign meant the difference between prosperity and disaster for entire regions. The ancient sources provide glimpses of a ruler increasingly burdened by the weight of his responsibilities. There were constant rebellions to suppress, each one requiring personal attention and often personal leadership of military campaigns. There were natural disasters to manage, floods that destroyed crops, droughts that emptied reservoirs, earthquakes that damaged cities. There were diplomatic crises as neighboring kingdoms tested the boundaries of Akkadian power. Perhaps most challenging of all, it was the question of succession. How could such a personal achievement be transferred to the next generation? How could institutions created by one man's vision and charisma survive the transition to new leadership? These were not merely theoretical questions, but practical challenges that would determine whether Sargon's empire would outlast its founder. The palace at Akkad, if we could visit it during the later years of Sargon's reign, would present a study in the loneliness of power. The king, now in his 70s, would be surrounded by courtiers, advisors, family members, and servants, yet fundamentally isolated by the magnitude of his responsibilities and the impossibility of finding anyone who truly understood the full scope of the challenges he faced daily. The evening of an empire Sargon ruled for 56 years, an extraordinary length of time in an era when violent death was the common fate of rulers. He lived to see his empire reach its greatest extent and to witness the beginning of problems that would eventually contribute to its decline. The very success of Akkadian expansion created new challenges: longer supply lines, more diverse populations to govern, greater opportunities for rebellion and external invasion. The king's final years were marked by a series of revolts that required him to take the field personally, despite his advanced age. The image of the elderly Sargon, perhaps supported by younger family members, but still leading his armies against rebels and invaders, speaks to both the personal nature of ancient kingship and the precarious foundation upon which even the greatest empires rest. When Sargon finally died, around 2279 BCE, he left behind more than just an empire. He had created new models of political organization, new concepts of law and administration, new patterns of trade and cultural exchange that would influence human civilization for millennia. The Akkadian language became the diplomatic tongue of the ancient Near East for over 1,000 years. The administrative techniques developed by Sargon's government influenced the Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians, and ultimately the Greeks and Romans. Yet perhaps his most important legacy was the simple demonstration that such unity was possible. Before Sargon, no one had imagined that diverse peoples could be brought together under a single government that respected their differences, while providing common benefits. After Sargon, this became the standard model for ambitious rulers throughout the ancient world. Reflections on a life as we consider Sargon's remarkable journey from abandoned infant to world conqueror. Certain themes emerge that speak to enduring aspects of human nature and historical change. His story illustrates the unpredictable ways in which individual talent and historical opportunity can combine to reshape the world. It demonstrates the importance of vision, the ability to imagine possibilities that don't yet exist, and to work systematically toward their realization. Perhaps most importantly, Sargon's life shows us how the patterns established by early civilizations continue to influence our world today. The concepts of centralized administration, standardized law, international trade, and cultural exchange that he pioneered remain fundamental aspects of modern global civilization. The challenges he faced managing diversity within unity, balancing local autonomy with central control, maintaining security while promoting prosperity, are still the central problems of political leadership in our own time. The ancient Mesopotamian sources remember Sargon not just as a conqueror, but as a founder, someone who created something new and valuable in the world. His empire eventually fell, as all empires do, but the institutions and ideas he developed proved more durable than bronze or stone. In the gentle rhythm of his rise from garden apprentice to world ruler, we can trace the emergence of concepts and practices that continue to shape human society 4,000 years after his death. As we drift toward our next segment, let this story of Sargon remind us that history is made not just by grand forces and inevitable trends, but by individuals who dare to imagine a different world and who possess the skill, persistence, and fortune necessary to make their visions real. In the quiet hours of the night, when the concerns of the day have faded and the mind is free to wander, we might reflect on what dreams of change and improvement we carry within ourselves, and what patient work of cultivation light that learned by a young man in the gardens of Kish might be required to bring them into being.